And this is Meg, the Doctor of Digital.
And welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower our sexes and, of course, our relationships. Another week, another great episode for sure. When a 24-year-old OnlyFans creator named Ari Krista recently addressed 1,200 psychology students at the University of Washington on surviving digital economies, performing online persona, and psychological implications of sexualized public spaces. The internet erupted in debate. Her own promotional question: what could Bob possibly teach a university class? With the answer, how to get paid, seem to be capturing something essential about our cultural moment. But I'm curious, Mr. Meg, would the early Christian have recognized anything familiar in this transaction?
Well, we're going to talk about the digital soul, while ancient wisdom is a cure for modern sexual dysregulation. The body as community. The modern laboratory of dating has reduced the human person to a high speed commodity, a series of swipes governed by the cold algorithms of the sovereign self. In this digital age wasteland, sexuality has become untethered from its covenantal roots, leading to a profound state of relational dysregulation and chronic loneliness. To find healing, we must look beyond the screen to the relational anthropology of the ante Nicene fathers and the radical communal ethics of the early church. By reclaiming the body as a sanctuary rather than a commodity, we can reconstruct an architecture of intimacy that offers the psychological and physiological calm necessary for true human flourishing. And in this, the American university has been a sanctuary for the weird, the radical, and the utterly unemployable. Ari Kristia, as a Ukrainian Canadian influencer with 2.5 million Instagram followers, she is now an OnlyFans model and social media presence, best known for her proximity to rapper Young Gravy and her ability to monetize the male gaze. Recently stood before a lecture hall at the University of Washington.
Mm.
And in
And
this good question. This is the first translate what a bop is, since I'm not hip enough to know young folks slang. Ari is considered a bop, a derogatory term for a person, usually a woman, perceived as promiscuous or moving around too much in the dating market. In any event, Christians would have recognized everything. The early Christian communities emerged in urban centers like Corinth, Ephesus, and Rome, cities where sexual commerce was as embedded in the economic infrastructure as grain trading. But what's striking isn't the existence of commodified sexuality, but rather how the technology of distribution has changed while the fundamental anthropology questions remain constant. Historian Peter Brown, in The Body and Society, documents how early Christians confronted an entire Mediterranean economy where bodies, particularly female bodies, function as tradable assets within complex systems of patronage, household management, and public entertainment. Consider Corinth, where Paul established one of his most challenging communities around 50 of this common era. Archaeological evidence reveals the city had numerous brothels, temple prostitutes associated with Aphrodite's cult, and an entertainment economy that treated human sexuality as a public spectacle. The Corinthian epistles address a community wrestling with how to live differently within this saturated sexual marketplace. When Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. He's not speaking abstractly. He's addressing people for whom the body as commodity was the default economic assumption. The parallel to platforms like OnlyFans becomes clear when we understand the economics. Ross Kramer's scholarship in Her Share of the Blessings demonstrates that Greco Roman sexual commerce operated on principles of parasocial relationship long before the term existed. Courtesans cultivated the illusion of genuine affection and personal connection while engaging in fundamentally transactional relationships. The Greek term heterai distinguished high status courtesans who sold not just sexual access, but the performance of intimacy, intellectual companionship, and exclusive attention. precisely the product OnlyFans markets as authentic connection with creators. What fascinated early Christian writers like Clement of Alexandria and John Chrysostom wasn't the moral dimension alone, but the anthropological question. What happens to human personhood when intimate relating becomes a commodity? Clement, writing in the late second century, observed that both the seller and purchaser of intimacy experience a kind of fragmentation. The seller learns to perform affection while guarding emotional detachment. The purchaser mistakes purchase performance for genuine connection. Both, he argued, lose access to the integrative experience of embodied communion that reflects divine intent for human sexuality. When Ari Christia tells a university audience that her expertise lies in getting paid through digital age sexual commerce, she's articulating precisely the economic anthropology that early Christians identified as fundamentally dehumanizing. In conclusion, the early Christians didn't think that sexuality is shameful, but they objected because commodification fractures the integration of body and soul, while, more importantly, the relational capacity that constitutes human flourishing.
Dr. Nicole McNicholas defined her invitation by saying Krista's voice and live experience are essential in any honest conversation about sexuality, labor, and the realities in today's digital landscape. She argued that such conversation expand empathy, challenge assumptions, and remind us that sexuality, relationships, and labor are always more complex, human, and nuanced than stereotypes we inherit. How would early Christian thinkers evaluate the claim that studying a phenomenon requires platforming its practitioners, Mr. Mike?
This is where we must distinguish between empirical observation and moral formation, a distinction the early Christians understood with remarkable sophistication. Augustine's Confessions, written around 397 or 400 of the Common Era, offers perhaps the most psychologically penetrating analysis of this exact dilemma. Augustine recounts his own youth attending theatrical performances in Carthage that depicted sexual scenarios. He wasn't participating in the acts themselves, but found himself emotionally invested in fictional sexual narratives, experienced what he called a disease of curiosity that shaped his desires through observation. Augustine's insight anticipated modern research on mirror neurons and vicarious experience. We are shaped not only by what we do, but by what we witness and imaginatively inhabit. David Hunter's recent scholarship in marriage and sexuality in early Christianity documents how patristic writers distinguish between studying human behavior analytically and creating pedagogical environments that normalize particular practices through exposure. The question wasn't just sexuality could be discussed. Paul's letters openly address prostitution, incest, and exploitive sexual dynamics, but whether the mode of discussion forms students toward wisdom or merely sophisticated rationalization. Dr. McNichol's defense rests on what we might call the ethnographic assumption that understanding a phenomenon requires hearing from practitioners in their own voice without critical framing. But Tertullian, writing about 200 Common Era in On the Shows, articulates a sophisticated counter-argument. He doesn't deny that theatrical performance have lived experience or that their narratives reveal social realities. Rather, he argues that certain modes of presentation create what we now call normalization effects, the unspoken message that this way of organizing human sexuality is one legitimate option among many, distinguished only by cultural prejudice from alternatives. The community contemporary research on parasocial relationship that Christasia herself was supposedly illuminating reveals precisely what Tertullian anticipated. Studies published in the Journal of Communication demonstrate that exposure to glamorized presentation of content creators, particularly in university settings that confer academic legitimacy, don't create critical distance, but rather increases positive associations and reduces perception of risks. When a university elevates an OnlyFans creator to the lecture podium between 1,200 students, the implicit curriculum runs deeper than the explicit content. It communicates that this life path merits institutional endorsement. John Chrysostom, preaching in Antioch in the 380s, addressed exactly this educational question. In his homilies on marriage and sexuality, he noted that Christian educators must consider not only informational content, but formational impact. Information about how sexual commerce operates can be conveyed through multiple pedagogical approaches: sociological analysis, testimony from those who's exited industry, critical examination of economic exploitation, or platforming current practitioners. Each approach carries different formational implications. Chrysostom argued that wisdom involves choosing methods that inform the mind while forming the moral imagination towards human flourishing rather than toward what he called the plausibility of sin. The question Dr. McNichols seems not to have engaged in is cui bono? Who benefits? Recent reporting reveals that Christia's appearance generated significant social media attention, expanding her brand precisely to the 18 to 24 demographic that universities serve. One critic noted the irony that this OnlyFans markets specifically to teenagers, encouraging them to view OnlyFans creation as aspirational before they're legally eligible to participate. The educational experience and appearance functions as sophisticated marketing, conferring academic legitimacy on what is, functionally, an attention economy business model built on commodifying parasocial intimacy. Early Christian educators would likely find Dr. McNichols' defense troubling, not because it discusses sexuality openly, but because it confuses studying a phenomenon with providing an uncritical platform that inevitably serves entrepreneurial rather than genuinely educational purposes. In conclusion, there are distinctions with that academics in the digital age seem increasingly unable to maintain.
Mr. Mac, a Mom Justice article addressing the lecture included a provocative line. Universities are hedge funds with football teams attached. The argument suggests that institutions of higher learning are already so compromised by financial incentives that honest education about how the attention economy actually works, including how only funds monetizes parasocial relationships, represents a kind of truth telling. Is there a something to this cynical realism, or does it represent capitulation disguised as honesty?
The argument reserves serious engagement because it touches on legitimate critiques of contemporary higher education while simultaneously using that critique to justify questionable practices. Let's unpack this through the lens of early Christian institutional analysis, particularly the church's wrestling with power, money, and educational formation in the fourth and fifth centuries. Historian Naomi Colton Froome's work on fourth century Christian educational institutions documents a fascinating parallel. As Christianity gained imperial favor under Constantine and his successors, Christian schools faced unprecedented questions about institutional integrity. Wealthy patrons offered funding with implicit expectations about curriculum and teaching appointments. Cities competed to attract famous Christian rhetoricians would enhance civic prestige. The economic model of elite education, wherein reputation, patronage networks, and social positioning drove institutional decisions, creating exactly the kind of hedge fund with philosophy schools attached dynamic. How did Christian educators respond? Figures like Basil of Caesarea and Gregory of Nazianzus articulated a principle we might call institutional self awareness without institutional cynicism. In Basil's Address to Young Men on Reading Greek Literature, written about 370 CE, he acknowledges that all educational institutions operate within economic and political structures that can corrupt their mission. But he argues this recognition creates an imperative for vigilance about core purposes, not permission to abandon those purposes in the name of realism. The argument that universities have become primarily financial entities, therefore, students might as well learn the realities of monetized sexuality, commits what Basil would identify as a category error. It confuses descriptive observation of institutional compromise with normative justification for particular practices. Yes, universities face intense financial pressures. Yes, the line between education and credentialing has blurred. Yes, attention economies shape contemporary institutions, but these realities create obligations for resistance and reform, not surrender. Consider Augustine's analysis in The City of God, written in response to Rome's sacking in 410 CE. He develops a sophisticated framework for understanding institutions as existing simultaneously in the earthly city, oriented toward power, profit, and self preservation, and the city of God, oriented toward truth, justice, and human flourishing. No institution exists purely in one city or the other. The question isn't whether universities have earthly city characteristics. Of course they do, but whether educators can still orient teaching towards goods beyond market logic. Recent scholarship on OnlyFans economics by researchers like those published in Sexuality and Culture reveals that the platform's business model depends on what they term commodification of intimacy and normalization of sexual objectification. The financial pressure on creators to generate constant content, the exploitation of parasocial bonds for profit, and the documented physiological harms, particularly to younger creators, constitute what early Christian thinkers would recognize as structural sin, systems that systemically undermine human flourishing even when individual participants experience short term benefits. When Dr. McNichols defends teaching students how the internet actually works by platforming an OnlyFans creator, she's making an argument about realism. But what kind of realism? Is it the realism that acknowledges commodified sexuality as one feature of contemporary digital economics while maintaining critical distance? Or is it the realism that presents such commodification as inevitable, perhaps even savvy, therefore participating in its normalization? The Mom's Justice article suggests the latter, that understanding digital attention economies, it requires not just analyzing them, but essentially accepting their logic as inescapable. This represents what Reinhold Niebuhr, drawing on Augustinian thought, called sophisticated cynicism, a posture that mistakes comprehension of power structures for wisdom when it actually represents a failure to imagine alternatives. The universities as hedge funds argument reveals real institutional pathologies while simultaneously using those pathologies to justify practices that further entrench them. In conclusion, this is precisely the kind of circular reasoning that early Christian institutional critics would identify as capitulation masquerading as clear eyed realism.
Very well said, Mr. Mick. Very well said. Krista's own framing. What could Bob possibly teach a university class? How to Get Paid contains a provocative claim about expertise. Is there a legitimate from a practical knowledge about digital economies that university students need, even if it comes from unconventional sources? How did early Christians think about different forms of knowledge and how counts as legitimate teacher?
This question strikes at the heart of epistemology, theories of knowledge, and the early Christians developed remarkably nuanced frameworks that remain relevant. The distinction they made wasn't between academic and practical knowledge, but between technical skill, episteme, systemic understanding, and phronesis, practical wisdom oriented toward human flourishing. Understanding this taxonomy illuminates what actually is at stake in Kitzia's lecture. The Apostle Paul, himself a leather worker who supported his teaching ministry through manual labor, had no inherent prejudice against practitioners or against learning from unconventional sources. In 1 Corinthians 1:26 through 29, he explicitly critiques social hierarchies that assign authority based on status rather than truth. Acts 18:3 notes he worked alongside Aquila and Priscilla in tent making, practical tradespeople whose knowledge was essential for early Christian communities. But Paul simultaneously maintained that not all knowledge serves human understanding equally. In 1 Corinthians 8:1, he writes, "Knowledge puffs up while love builds up." This isn't anti intellectualism, it's a framework for evaluating knowledge based on its orientation and effects. Knowledge that increases technical competence without contributing to communal well being or personal integration represents what classical philosophy would call techne without telos, skill without purpose or end. Kritsia claims expertise in getting paid through OnlyFans, and this is indeed a form of knowledge. It requires understanding platform algorithms, content marketing, parasocial relationship management, personal branding, and digital attention economies. Scholars like those published in the Journal of Communication would classify this as valuable ethnographic data about contemporary sexual labor markets. However, Clement of Alexandria, Stromatitis, written about 190 to 200 CE, offers a crucial distinction. He differentiates between knowledge of how things work versus wisdom about whether and how they should work. A successful slave trader in the ancient world possessed extensive practical knowledge about human trafficking markets, supply chains, and profit maximization. This knowledge was real and could be studied, but Clement argued that inviting such a person to teach technique without critically examining practice itself, without asking fundamental questions about human dignity, coercion, and social goods, would constitute educational malpractice. The parallel isn't perfect because OnlyFans involves adults making ostensibly free choices, whereas slavery involves explicit coercion. But the epistemological principle holds. Technical knowledge about how to succeed within a system requires separate analysis from wisdom about whether the system itself promotes human flourishing. Contemporary research on OnlyFans reveals troubling patterns that complicate claims about expertise and agency. Studies show that while top creators earn substantial income, the median creator earns less than $200 monthly. The platform structure creates intense pressure for escalation, what researchers call the content treadmill, where creators must produce increasingly explicit or niche content to maintain subscriber attention. Multiple studies document burnout, psychological distress, and the challenge of exiting the industry once content is permanently online. Kitsia's own warning to students, reported by Dr. McNichols, is revealing. Only do it if there is truly nothing else you want to do, because once your content is out there, it will follow you. This statement contradicts the entrepreneurial framing of OnlyFans creation as simply another digital hustle. It acknowledges irreversibility, risk, and constraint, hardly the markers of unambiguous expertise leading to flourishing. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the late 4th century, addressed precisely this question of embodied knowledge in his On Virginity. He doesn't deny that those engaged in sexual commerce possess real knowledge about human desire, economic exchange, and social dynamics. But he argues that such knowledge, gained through practices that fragment the person, create inherent epistemic limitations. The person who has learned to commodify intimacy, he suggests, may know much about technique and transaction, but has made themselves less capable of understanding non commodified relationships as such, because the practice itself reshapes the knower. The more the influencer earns, the less human they become. Just as casino dealers become highly skilled at their practice while potentially losing the capacity to see gambling's harms, creators who build successful OnlyFans careers through parasocial relationship management may develop genuine expertise in attention economy mechanics while losing access to critical perspectives on the practice itself. Kitsia can indeed teach students about OnlyFans monetization works, but this technical knowledge exists within a much larger framework of questions about human sexuality, dignity, economic exploitation, and social goods. In conclusion, her particular expertise, shaped by the practice itself, may actually obscure rather than illuminate.
Illuminate indeed. One striking feature of OnlyFans model is how it differs from traditional pornography by marketing authenticity and real connection. Subscribers pay for personal content, direct messaging, and illusion of a genuine relationship. How would early Christian thinkers analyze this evolution from explicit fantasy to commodified reality?
This represents perhaps the most insidious development in sexual commerce, and the early Christian analysis of truth, performance, and desire provides penetrating insight. The shift from pornography as fantasy to OnlyFans as authenticity reveals deep anthropological confusions about desire, personhood, and what constitutes real connection. Aline Roussel's historical research in Porneia A desire and body in antiquity demonstrates that ancient Mediterranean culture already grappled with distinctions between theatrical sexual performance and soul intimacy. Temple prostitution, particularly associated with goddess cults, marketed itself not as a mere physical transaction, but as participation in sacred reality. The rhetoric promised a genuine encounter with the divine through the erotic, not merely a simulated experience. Early Christians recognized this marketing of authenticity as particularly dangerous precisely because it imitated genuine communion for commercial purposes. OnlyFans represents the logical evolution of this dynamic into the digital attention economy. Unlike traditional pornography, which maintains theatrical distance, OnlyFans markets the collapse of the performer person distinction. Creators use their actual names or carefully constructed authentic personas, share behind the scenes glimpses of daily life, respond personally to messages, and create custom content that acknowledges individual subscribers. The product being sold is not a sexual fantasy, but the experience of mattering personally to the attractive other. Tertullian, in his treatise On the Shows, anticipated this exact problem in his critique of theatrical culture. He noted that the danger wasn't primarily explicit content, but the way performance mocks an authentic human response. When audiences learn to experience real emotion through purchase simulation, they develop what he called a counterfeit capacity for love, the ability to generate feelings of intimacy without the reciprocal vulnerability, mutual knowing, and shared life that constitute actual communion. John Chrysostom, preaching in late 4th century Constantinople, addressed the wealthy men of his congregation who maintained courtesans. He didn't simply moralize about sexual immorality. Instead, he offered a sophisticated analysis of self deception. These men knew intellectually that the courtesan's affection was purchased, yet they emotionally invested in its authenticity because human desire craves not just pleasure, but recognition. The courtesan sold the appearance of genuine desire for the client himself, not merely of the transaction. Sound familiar? Research on loneliness and digital connection reveals the broader context. Young adults report historic highs of loneliness and social isolation. Traditional pornography consumption has intensified while actual sexual activity has decreased. Into this void, OnlyFans offers a product that feels like a connection while delivering systemic disconnection. Subscribers mistake purchase performance for genuine attention, while creators learn to fragment their person into content generating performance, holding back their actual self from the transaction. In conclusion, the shift from pornographic fantasy to OnlyFans authenticity represents not progress toward honest sexuality, but a more thorough commodification, one that perverts not just bodies, but the human capacity for genuine relational recognition, turning our deepest need to be known into a monetizable transaction.
So, Mr. Meg, something particularly troubling about this situation is the demographic. A 1,200 psychology students may presumably interested in helping professions or being exposed to OnlyFans creation as potentially legitimate career path. Critics noted that Christos marketing specifically targets teenagers. How would the early Christians' educational theories say about formation of young adults at this crucial development stage?
This strikes at the heart of what early Christians understood as paideia, the comprehensive formation of young people not just in knowledge, but in character, desire, and vision of human flourishing. The question isn't just whether psychology students should study digital sexuality. They absolutely should. But what formative environment best serves that study? Basil of Caesarea's 4th century address to young men grapples with exactly this challenge. Young Christian men in Caesarea needed classical education to function in Greco Roman society. But that education included exposure to texts celebrating pagan gods, martial violence, and sexual exploitation. Basil's solution wasn't censorship, but formative framing. Students could read Homer, but needed simultaneous training in discernment, the capacity to extract valuable lessons while critiquing underlying worldviews. Lynn Cohick's research in Christian women in the patristic world documents how early Christian communities created alternative educational environments specifically for young people navigating hypersexualized Greco-Roman culture. These weren't primarily restrictive or sheltering, they were formational. Young people learned to analyze cultural practices critically while developing capacities for different ways of living. The curriculum included studying problematic cultural dynamics. How else would you recognize them? But always within a framework that maintained imaginative spaces for alternatives. Multiple critics noted a troubling dimension. Christia's brand specifically targets younger audiences, including teenagers not yet legally eligible for OnlyFans. Her TikTok following of 4.9 million includes substantial numbers of minors. Her Instagram aesthetic presents OnlyFans creation as an aspirational lifestyle. Now, a university gives her institutional legitimacy before 1,200 emerging adults at precisely the life stage when vocational imagination forms. The educational framing masks what functionally operates as sophisticated recruitment marketing. Augustine addressed exactly this dynamic in his analysis of rhetoric and formation. In On Christian Doctrine, he argues that teachers bear responsibility not just for information conveyed, but for desires shaped. When educators present practices without a critical framework, they shape students' sense of the possible, the normal, and the acceptable. This isn't about censorship, it's about recognizing that all education is formative, whether intentionally or not. John Chrysostom, addressing young men in Antioch, emphasized that formation requires not just exposure to realities, but cultivation of moral imagination, the capacity to envision and desire alternatives. Without this, realism about how the world works becomes training in sophisticated participation in the world's brokenness. Early Christian educational theory would suggest that 1,200 psychology students at a formative life stage deserve better than platforming an OnlyFans creator without robust critical framing. Not because the topic shouldn't be studied, but because genuine education requires simultaneously exposing students to realities and cultivating the capacity to imagine and enact themselves. In conclusion, ancient wisdom is the cure for modern sexual dysregulation.
Very well said, Mr.
And
Meg. And something particularly troubling about this situation is something else, right? So, the Christian
yeah,
movement introduced a disrupted claim a person's worth does not come from market demand. In hierarchy driven society, status determined value. Christianity argued the opposite. The dignity was inherent, not purchased, not performed, not negotiated. And Mr. Mink, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And would you please plug in something, Mr. Mike?
appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn. GMIC, the Dr. of Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Dr. of Digital podcast. Pick up volumes I have on Amazon. On Track, Ian Hunter, and Burning America.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Mike, the Dr. Digital, and please do listen to our other podcasts, Music 101, of course, Sex 101, Love Letters, and Mental Health 101 coming after this. So, Mr. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Till next time, Deus Vult.
Welcome, people. See you soon.